Cuba. Is Iran now a bigger foreign policy priority for you than China? And on Cuba, the Cuban government.
Iran is just a military operation to me.
Base
Iran
Trump.
is
Go Trump
something that
forever.
was essentially largely over in 2 or 3 days because the Navy was wiped out almost immediately. The Air Force came next. The anti-aircraft came next. I mean, we're flying over Iran. We could take out their electric capacity in 1 hour. We have all the, there's nothing they can do right now because everything is knocked out. They have no, again, no radar, no anti-aircraft. They have nothing. And we don't, and it was a decision I made. We discussed it. Pete, Marco, JD, all of us, Chris, we discussed it. We can knock out their electricity in a matter of minutes if we wanted to. There's nothing they can do about it. We can knock out their oil in Carg Island. The only thing we didn't take down was their oil because if we knock out, I call them the pipes, very complex. But if you do that, it'll take them forever to rebuild, meaning whoever, and hopefully it's a sane group of people, but whoever it is that's going to be running that, and we're going to try to get people that are going to run it well, and it's going to be a prosperous, wonderful place. It used to be, if you go back, it used to be the people are great, the people are smart and energetic, and it used to be very successful. Now it's a country run by fear. It's a country where they tell protesters, don't go outside because if you do, we're going to kill you.
Yeah. Why do you hate the Poles and repeat Polish jokes from the 20s when we were not considered white in the same way as the Irish? I love Polish people.
Mr. President. Well, Cuba right now is
Notice how you had to go back to the 1920s, by the way? We live in 2026. Poland just surpassed Switzerland with its economy. I think you're doing fine, If you had to go back to 100 years in the past for to point to like Polish oppression, it's a little ridiculous. I think Poland's doing fairly well, all things considered, especially as the rest of the European countries are not doing well at all.
Very bad shape. They're talking to Marco, and we'll be doing something with Cuba very soon.
Mr. President.
We're really focused on this, but we're dealing with Cuba. Marco, do you want to say a couple of words about it?
Yeah, I mean, Cuba has an economy that doesn't work and a political and governmental system they can't fix. It's not dramatic enough. It's not going to fix it. So they've got some big decisions to make over there.
But Secretary Rubio, do you support, and I know this is up to Congress.
I hate this fucking, I hate that they are like also actively warmongering against Cuba and starving Cuba and killing Cubans. It's so nasty.
Do you support easing the trade embargo if you get more cooperation from Havana?
Well, I'm not going to discuss what we would talk about or not. Suffice it to say that the embargo is tied to political change on the island. The law, the embargo is codified. And but the bottom line is their economy doesn't work. It's a non-functional economy.
Yeah, it doesn't work because of our fucking endless repression against the Cuban people. For the record, a lot of people don't understand that, for example, right now, the administration is floating the idea of allowing Cuban Americans to be able to purchase private property in the island, right? This has been a long-standing attitude that the Cuban government has had, okay? In spite of the potential destabilizing repercussions that it might have, it opens up a new front of American intervention in the island. They don't give a shit. They've been saying yes to it since the normalization agreement with Barack Obama. Okay? They're fine with it. The only setback against Cuban Americans being able to make investments into the Cuban island is not the Cuban government, it's the American government. This is a lie, okay? This is a fucking lie that the American government actively repeats. It's remarkable. I'll show you. Here is a professor of political science, Orlando J. Perez. Okay? Before you rush to invest in Cuba, it's good to know what U.S. law actually allows. The Cuban Assets Control Regulations, CACR 31 CFR Part 515, prohibits U.S. persons from engaging in virtually any transaction in which Cuba or a Cuban national has an interest, including investments without a specific OFAC license. I also know this from our dealings with even sending humanitarian aid to Cuba. We had to work with the Treasury to be able to get clearances and OFAC, specifically OFAC clearances, so that we can send even one fucking solar panel to the Cuban population. You understand? It's absurd the amount of restrictions that the American government has placed on anyone that wants to help with aid to the Cuban population or anyone that wants to engage in any sort of investment opportunity in Cuba literally needs to deal with the American government. No current general license covers what Havana just announced. This is the Cuban embassy in the U.S. that just announced government decision to facilitate the participation of Cubans living abroad in the country's economy, announced by Deputy Prime Minister Poliva Oscar. Allow Cubans living abroad without actual residency in Cuba to participate in or own private businesses in Cuba. We lie and we lie and we say like, oh, Cuba has no private markets whatsoever. Cuba has no small businesses. All of this shit is a lie, okay? They do. Not only do they have, is this presented as like a black market when it's not. It's like the government allows small businesses to operate. But also outside of that, the government has been saying since the Obama administration that they're perfectly fine with foreign Cubans, okay, Cuban Americans investing in businesses inside of Cuba. This applies not only to small business, but it can also include infrastructure and large enterprises. Now, this is important. The reason why this literally is something the Cuban government is allowing, but the American government will not allow, is because, as Orlando J. Perez correctly points to, the State Department's Cuba restricted list, reinstated by Secretary Rubio in February 2025, 237 entities, prohibits direct financial transactions with the Cuban military, intelligence, and security-linked enterprises. GAESA alone controls an estimated 60% of the Cuban economy. Any large infrastructure investment runs straight through it. So they say the Cuban government's like, you can make investments into infrastructure companies if you would like to. The American government says you can't do that because there is still Cuban government ownership, and the Cuban government is considered a state sponsor of terror. Okay, it's ridiculous that this is a consideration, but unfortunately, that is the reason why you can't make any investments into Cuba at all. The Central Bank of Cuba is a government institution. U.S. persons opening accounts there triggers CACR prohibitions. And since NSPM 5 was reissued in June 2025, even U-turn payment channels are being rolled back. Western Union stopped processing Cuban transfers in February 2025. So who is this announcement really for? It's a signal to Washington. There's something to trade. The announcement drops on the same day as Cuba's national grid collapsed again. No fuel shipments in 3 months. The desperation is real. The core question isn't whether Cubans abroad want to invest. Many do. It's whether Washington will adjust OFAC rules to allow it, under what conditions, with what verification mechanisms, and whether any opening actually reaches private entrepreneurs or gets captured by the same gatekeepers who control Cuba's economy. This person is not like pro the Cuban government or ideologically a communist, by the way. He's just telling you exactly what's currently the real setback against Cuban Americans making any investment decisions on the island. Okay? It's fucking insane. So much of our ambitions in foreign countries is kept together by abject lies, okay? What do you think about the reporting that the U.S. is working with the Cuban military to take over the state? Apparently, Rubio has been talking to the military rather than civilian leaders. The Cuban military has also, over the years, taken over more commercial activities from the state. Do you think that's realistic or just meant to cause distrust within Cuba? No, I think that both the military and the current Cuban government, regardless of who's in charge, is still run by communists. So I don't know what the decision is. And not only are they like hardliners, they unironically are hardliners about having a completely centrally planned, completely centrally controlled economy. They're such hardliners that even China is confused. For according to the Foreign Times article that I was reading, even China has been confused at times to see why they won't do any revisionism, any reforms whatsoever. Except that's not the full story. They are open to revisionism. It's just that the American government doesn't allow them to actually follow through on any sort of revisions. Cuba is also not like Venezuela in the sense that the Venezuelan government has popular support, right? Or had popular support. Maduro had popular support from the base of Chavistas, even though his popular support was diminishing. In Cuba, there are obviously people who hate the government, right? There's like, not every single one of them are agents of the American state. There are people who are frustrated and falsely attribute their pain and their struggle to the Cuban government, and don't see the Cuban government's decision making as a triage out of necessity, because they just simply don't have the goods to be able to offer all the services to every single person all the fucking time, because they're objectively kept poor after decades of American restrictions. But what is this? What are you talking about? Venezuela's government has zero support. Yeah, you're a fucking idiot. The Chavistas, albeit diminished, were still the base of support for the fucking Venezuelan government. Like, they had, I don't know what the exact percentage is, but you're objectively wrong. So wrong that even Trump recognized that when push came to shove, and that's the reason why Delcy Rodriguez is still in charge. There was no popular support, or at least popular enough support that wouldn't completely fucking destabilize the country, which would make it impossible to extract oil, if Maria Machado was placed in charge. If the numbers were correct, Maria Machado's representative was supposed to get 70% of the votes, right? That's bullshit. That's not correct. If that was the case, then America could have easily engaged in a bloodless coup where they could have just brought Maria Machado into the state. In charge is bra for Delcy. Yes, I'm just saying that like they chose to keep the government intact because the Chavistas still make up a decent percentage in the popular mobilization. They like I'll give you an example. If you're not objectively, if you don't have a real social base for your movement, you can't have collectivos, okay? Collectivos are what? Guys who are, party cadres, people who are ideologically loyal to Chavez and therefore loyal to Maduro as well. If they didn't have that social base, they wouldn't arm 8 million fucking Venezuelans with small arms, right? They couldn't do that because then those small arms would be inevitably used against Maduro himself. Sometimes it's that simple. If you want to comprehend like how this stuff works, think about it. It's not dissimilar to how the United States of America, for example, has a Second Amendment, because they know that the people that have those arms, regardless of the American government's unpopularity, they know that the right-wing base of support has a shit ton of weapons, and they will never train those weapons on the government itself. Okay? It's kind of like that. I'm not making I'm not engaging in moral equivocation between like the Chavistas and the MAGA base or the right-wing reactionaries, obviously, but you can think of it like that. Okay? Sugar daddies, the Havemeyer Sugar Trust to Alan Dulles, to Jeffrey Epstein, the mega billionaire Fonjul family are the welfare barons of all time. One of the persons behind the Trump sudden interest in Cuba. Okay, we'll look at that in a second. Anyway, speaking of Cuban intervention, though, once again, the Cuban government is perfectly open and has been open to foreign investment. Okay, they need it. They need the foreign investment. They understand that they need the foreign investment. They want the foreign investment. Cuba has stayed alive in spite of American intervention, especially in the aftermath of the dissolution of the USSR, their largest trading partner and their security partner that allowed Cuba to develop the way that it did. When that went away, if you noticed, a lot of the countries that were, nations aligned with the Soviets were destroyed. Cuba was able to survive in spite of that. A big part of the reason why was because Venezuela kept propping it up, okay? And also all the other countries in the region kept offering aid, kept sending oil to the island because the island doesn't have any oil, right? Kept its energy grid going. Cuba's survival, in spite of the largest imperial superpower actively seeking out its destruction, is a testament to the resilience of not only this movement, but an interest in the regular, ordinary Cubans and their interest in keeping Cuban sovereignty alive. Okay? A lot of people here in the United States of America listen to their immediate relatives that are suffering on this island and think that this suffering is not born out of the American government's actions, but actually the ideological zealotry that the Cuban government has in terms of like maintaining communism. Okay? Oh, it's just that they want to do communism. That's the reason. But if you understand how Cuba got to the point, Cubans almost blew up America, Hasan. Wait, what? What are you talking about? That's literally not correct at all. There has never been a point in time where Cuba has actually presented a serious threat to the United States of America. And every single step of the way, the American government has done terrorism, tried to do terrorism in the United States of America and blame it on Cuba. That's another part of the story. That's also another crazy story. America wanted to do a 9/11 Cuban style. Okay? Did you guys know that? The American CIA floated the idea of doing a 9/11 on U.S. soil and then blame it on Cuba to draw up popular support to invade Cuba. America kept routinely engaging in acts of terrorism over the Cuban airspace by sending ships, sending airplanes over the Cuban airspace. Again, it's 90 miles off the coastline of America. America has never stopped doing acts of terrorism on Cuban soil. Many of you are completely oblivious to this. Okay? We have sent airplane after airplane to bomb Cuban crops. We have engaged in an act of terrorism when Cuba finally realized that they have to arm up against American invasion. When the Cuban government set a deal forward with the Belgian government to get arms. And this is like part of the process in how Cuba found itself aligning with the USSR, because their initial goals were not to like immediately become aligned with the USSR. They just they thought, okay, we got sovereignty. We were able to overthrow the American-backed puppet dictator, Batista, who was unimaginably violent, unimaginably ruthless, unimaginably cruel, far more violent than even the Cuban Revolution was, for the record, just so you know. And they got a weapons transfer from the Belgian government. America blew up the weapons on Cuban ports, okay? They literally killed a bunch of Cubans They sabotaged the weapons transfer and blew it up. And then they stopped the investigations from being conducted. To this day, we don't know exactly who was responsible for the Belgian weapons transfer exploding in the Havana ports. We still don't know. There was years and years of biological warfare against the Cuban people. There were years and years of terrorism against the Cuban population. And not only, Operation Mongoose, the Cuban project, also known as Operation Mongoose, was an extensive campaign of terrorist attacks against civilians and covert operations carried out by the U.S. Central Intelligence Agency in Cuba. It was officially authorized on November 30th, 1961, by U.S. President John F. Kennedy. The name Operation Mongoose was agreed to at a White House meeting on November 4th, 1961. The operation was led by the U.S. Air Force, General Edward Lansdale on the military side, and William King Harvey at the CIA, and went into effect after the failed Bay of Pigs invasion. And then the planned attacks against Miami was Operation Northwoods. Operation Northwoods was a proposed false flag operation which originated within the Department of Defense in the U.S. government in 1962. Okay? Yeah. This is the memorial service, the famous photos from. But anyway, La Cobra explosion at the harbor in Havana was on 4th of March, 1960, where it was unloading 76 tons of grenades and munitions. 75 to 100 people were killed and many were injured. Fidel Castro alleged it was an act of sabotage on part of the United States, which denied any involvement. It's bullshit. They did do it. Okay? The CIA, 4 years after the successful revolution in Cuba, basically got every single anti-Cuban, anti-communist that they could find on the island and also in the United States of America to consistently engage in acts of sabotage and acts of terrorism against the regular, ordinary Cuban population. For years, they never stopped. This is also on top of the sanctions that we kept putting on the Cuban population. Part of the reason for the sanctions on the American side was because Cuba engaged in land reform. Okay? Cuba engaged in land reform as an act of sovereignty in an effort to develop their country in the way that they wanted to, in a way that was more egalitarian under communist principles. Okay? There was a lot of mafia, a lot of labor unions by way of mafia, and a lot of American investment in Cuba at the time that was forcibly stripped away from foreign invaders and given back to the Cuban people. This not only frustrated a lot of the extremely wealthy Cubans that were aligned with the Batista regime at the time, who now had to give up some of their land, right? And for the record, if you want to understand the sincerity of this land reform, Fidel Castro's own parents had more land that was allowed by the Cuban government. Fidel Castro literally made his own parents give up parts of their land in the expropriation process. Okay? That's how real they were. There's a chance that when you arrive in Cuba, there won't be any internet or electricity at all, almost anywhere. How will you be able to stream? I have my own methods. I'm bringing a full kit that I will be leaving behind in Cuba as well for the Cubans. But I have solar panels. I have a battery bank with a solar panel My operation is designed in a way where I can literally go to an area where there is no electricity and basically no internet and still be able to stream. We'll see. We'll see. Anyway, Operation Northwoods, the one I was talking about, was the proposal that called for the CIA operatives to both stage and commit acts of terrorism against the U.S. military and civilian targets, and then blame them on the Cuban government and use them to justify a war against Cuba. The possibilities detailed in the document included the remote control of civilian aircraft, which would be secretly repainted as U.S. Air Force planes, a fabricated shoot-down of a U.S. Air Force fighter aircraft off the coast of Cuba, the possible assassination of Cuban immigrants, sinking boats of Cuban refugees on the high seas, exploding a U.S. ship, and orchestrating terrorism in U.S. cities. The proposals were famously rejected by John F. Kennedy. This was one of the big issues that JFK had with the CIA. JFK said, look, I'm fine with interference in Cuban affairs. Obviously, they're communists. They're terrifying. JFK was an anti-communist as well. For those of you who don't know, he wasn't this like woke hero that people present him as. But he was like, this is a bridge too far. I believe it was after Operation Northwood that JFK famously said, I want to rip the CIA apart piece by piece, if I'm not mistaken. Okay, Iran has officially confirmed the security chief Ali Larijani has been killed. The Iranian media is confirming it now. And then they slimed him. Yeah, he said he wanted to splinter the CIA into 1,000 pieces.